So we soaked the bearings overnight in a parts solution, took some shop clean, brake cleaner, and really sprayed to get all the crevices and get all the little bits of debris out of these bearings. We don't want any bits of rust or any bits of the filings from turning the rotors in these bearings. We want them super, super clean before we pack them with new grease. So, probably difficult to see, but I've got a little number 2 stamped right in the rotor here. I've got a punch set and I just tapped a little number 2 there. And as I cleaned and kept track of the bearings, I made sure they stayed with the rotor. And the same over here so that we can keep them matched. It's important to keep them as a matched set if you're going to reuse them. So we're going to get the bearings packed with grease. We got to get them all greased before we put them back into the car. So the first step is we're going to take a kind of a big wad of grease, and this is just standard wheel bearing grease you can pick up at the auto parts store, right? And if I'm right-handed, so it's kind of usually best to put the wad of grease in your left hand. And what we want to do is we're going to try to get the grease forced up around right in through here. We're going to push the grease up through the bearing, and then we'll see it just coming out of the top of the bearing here. So you just kind of grab the bearing and you're pushing down into the grease. You're just on this kind of front edge. So you push down, swipe it away a little bit, push down, swipe it. And each time you do that, you're forcing a little bit of grease up into the bottom of this bearing. And eventually, and it'll take a few times as you're pushing it down and forcing it up. And you can tell when it's full or you've got it enough. You'll see the grease just coming out of the top of the bearing. So that way you know this whole section there is packed with grease. And from there you just spin it a little bit and work on the next section. It'll probably take you 3 or 4 times to go around the bearing and get the whole bearing filled with grease. So it's really that simple. All right, so we've got the bearings packed, and we're going to go ahead and install the inner bearing and get the seal on. So let's pull off our duct tape, which we had used to kind of protect the bearing race, and you can kind of see inside of here, this is the bearing race. It's actually a separate little metal piece that gets tapped in. We never took it out, and we're gonna use it as is. So I'm gonna go ahead and I had cleaned all the old grease out of here, making sure we didn't have any contaminants in there. You don't need to pack this full of grease, this void inside of here, but I'm just gonna put a little bit in there just to coat the surface so that nothing will rust down the road. So I'm just gonna grab the inner bearing, the little larger one, just kind of drop that in. And I'm gonna, just a tiny bit of grease to kind of fill that area between the bearing and the rotor. And then we're going to take the seal and we're just going to tap that on. So we're just going to do that gently. Should be able to just gently go around until it's seated. And you can kind of tell when it's all the way down and seated. Okay, that's good, and we'll do the same thing on the other one.
All right, what's next?
All right, so we're ready to put the rotor on. We've got the bearing, the inner bearings in. We took some time to really clean off the spindle. There was a lot of grease on there. So we've done that. So this is just a matter of sliding the rotor on. And we want to get that rear seal seated. And I can feel that seat right back. We'll take the outer bearing, that we've already got greased. That just simply slides in. The thrush washer, and it's keyed, so that there's only one way that can go on. And then the nut on the end. So what we're going to do, I was looking for a spec in the manual as to how tight this should be, and really couldn't find one. So what I've typically done in the past is, as I'm spinning this, I tighten this. I'm going to need a little bit of a wrench here to help it along. And I'm just going to snug this and I'm going to keep spinning the rotor as I'm doing it. I'm just trying to make sure everything gets seated. And I'm tightening that just a little bit more. And that's probably about as far as I want to tighten it. I can see the rotor spins, but it stops pretty quickly. I'm going to back that off, maybe 1/8 of a turn to 1/4 of a turn. Just so that it's spinning freely and the bearings aren't too tight. And then from there we'll just tighten down the hex nut and then we just tap on the dust cover and we'll be all done. So we've got the calipers, the front calipers installed. We've got a new soft brake line hooked up. We've got a hard brake line, new one, going to the master cylinder. We've got the front rotor resurfaced. So other than bleeding, the front brake is pretty much ready to go.